Well, he made a major impression in one of the most fascinating episodes of HBO's Watchmen as the first superhero in the world. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and this is Jovan Adepo. Thank you so much for joining me. It was funny. I was reading an article the other day, or I remember reading one from Backstage where Damon Lindelof was talking about, I broke my one casting rule for Watchmen to never work with anyone again, and I did it for Regina King, but he was mistaken because he did it twice in this one show.
All right.
Because the both of you worked on Leftovers with him, and now we're back. He normally does not repeat actors that often. So were you ever expecting to get a call to work with Damon ever again?
No, not at all. And the thing is, like, Damon checks in with his actors. I mean, most of the actors that he works with, they become friends, I assume, but checks in with me all the time. So it wasn't like a weird thing to hear from him. You know what I mean? Like, he would occasionally text just to see how I'm doing and if I'm up to anything fun or anything like that. So when I heard from him, I remember it must have been like in January of last year. And I was just like in the gym, and he sent me a text message like, "Hey, Jovan, how's everything?" And I was like, "Cool, dude, everything's good." And then when he told me exactly the reason for him messaging me, then I was like completely blown away and kind of just in disbelief, like you said, because he's not known to work with actors again. So I was pretty surprised, to answer your question.
Your character in this is great because you play the younger version of Will Reeves, and he survives the Tulsa race massacre. And there was this huge thing that happened online when this episode was released where I think this event has sadly been so ignored and covered up by history in our country that it's not one that a lot of people actually know about. I know people were like, is this part of the Watchmen's like alternate universe kind of thing? So I know you weren't in the episode that depicted that event, but it obviously haunts him. So what kind of research was important for you when you went into this project?
So I had already been aware of the Tulsa massacre just because when I went to school, I was a political science and history and government major. So I kind of already had this, I would say, just a general knowledge of that event in history. So as far as preparing for the episode, I was really fortunate that Damon and the other writers had really gone out of their way to make sure that I had all of the materials, and not even just about that particular moment in history, but also just the kind of universe that they were building for the show. Just because, as you know, I was coming into the 6th episode, and it was just kind of like a wonder. So I think I was just really lucky that all of the questions that I had about Will and his, I guess, evolution in the Hood of Justice, as well as all of the characters that he'd be in contact with, I was lucky that Damon provided all of the backstory and kind of just filled me in on what kind of happened to Will up until that moment where the episode starts.
Yeah. And we should talk about Hood of Justice because the huge reveal, it's one of the biggest reveals in the whole series, is that Will turns into Hood of Justice. And what I loved about it, because I loved the original comic book, and it's sort of like Hood of Justice is suddenly, we find out in this, contrary to popular belief, black gay man. But it does that in a way where it doesn't retcon anything from the comics. So I'm curious, just what was your reaction when you first found out that you were going to get to do that origin story?
I didn't know what to say because I had seen the film that I thought was great by Zack Snyder, so I knew vaguely of who Hood of Justice was, but I didn't know like his name and everything like that. I just remember seeing like a photo from the original graphic novel and just being like, oh, I remember seeing like the live action version of that in the film, but I didn't know anything about his backstory other than that his identity was unknown to like majority of the people, if not everyone in that universe. So when Damon told me that he was deciding to make this character black and what it meant for him to kind of be the first vigilante in racist America, I thought it was something that was incredibly amazing, and it was definitely an opportunity that I feel even to this day that I was really blessed to be a part of.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious because a lot of the themes of this show is kind of about wearing a mask, and obviously he can't be himself in a lot of ways, equally in that time in America. So do you think it's kind of easier for him to be Hooded Justice than it is for him to be Will Reeves in some sense?
I think you could look at it that way. I mean, it's kind of like a double-edged sword because he has the luxury of hiding his identity behind, well, not even the, I don't want to say luxury. I guess he just has the ability to hide himself behind the mask, but at the same time, it's kind of like with anybody, if they're pretending to be someone that they're not, they're always going to have that kind of like that yearning to be able to show people who they really are, because who wants to spend their whole lives, hiding behind what people think they are as opposed to getting to be your natural self. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think he had a duty once he decided to pick up the mantle as Hooded Justice to put the makeup on and put the mask on. But if you're asking if, in my opinion, if Will wanted to, I think if he had the choice to pick, he would love to be just Will Reeves and the complete Will Reeves. And that means being comfortable in his color, being comfortable in his sexuality, and just who he has become since he was born. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see him kind of try to do that so hard because he tries not to wear a mask. He tries to be a good citizen, join the police force, but there's racists in the police force. And he tries to explore his sexuality, but the lover or boyfriend he finds kind of uses him and demeans him in a way. So I'm wondering, do you think what does that do for him as a superhero? What does that turn Hooded Justice into as an outlet for him?
Well, I think before you talk about what it turns him into as a superhero, I think you have to look at what it does to him as a person.
Yeah.
If it's a guy that just has done his best to escape the harsh reality of the circumstances he's living in, like you said, he tried to, put on the mask and fight crime in hopes of providing justice because he truly believed initially that he could do that with a badge. And when he found he couldn't, it was like this harsh reality that he had to kind of embrace. And when it comes to exploring his sexuality, I think perhaps he looked at Nelson as someone who was finally able to kind of understand what he was going through. But then again, as you see in the episode, we found out that he doesn't, because even though he's more than happy to spend his private time with his lover when they're out in public, he has to hide his body. And Nelson, who kind of gave him the idea that, nobody's ever allowed to know who you are other than what you represent with that mask. And that's heartbreaking to Will. I think that I guess that's like just a natural segue into your original question, is that having all of these different instances of the episode kind of playing and weighing in on Will, I think that just naturally feeds into his aggression, which, as you see, is something he's battled with his entire life.
Yeah. And from a technical standpoint, this episode is very highly stylized. It's kind of like a dream sequence almost. It's filmed in black and white sepia tone. So it's directed by Stephen Williams. How did he sort of guide you through that? What was his sort of outlook on the tone of the episode?
Well, I remember flying into to Atlanta where we filmed, or where they filmed the entire season. I remember coming in and like kind of meeting all of the people involved in the production, and I sat in Steven's office with Danielle Deadweiler, who plays June brilliantly, by the way. We sat in Steven's office, and he kind of walked us through exactly what he was trying to do with this continuous shot kind of idea. And I can tell you, as soon as he explained it, I was like incredibly excited, but just kind of freaking out at the same time, because one of the main things that he emphasized would have to happen is that there was going to have to be just endless rehearsal for one thing, and just you have to be like on point with all of your blocking. Because whenever you saw, I know that, or I'm sure they've talked about it in interviews before, but whenever you saw moments where Regina and I were swapping in and out, that wasn't really a camera trick. That was like, them having to move the camera slightly and me and Regina having to switch out of it and like be able to switch positions. But, you can't be like shaking when you get back on camera, or breathing heavy or whatever. So it was like we had to do takes over and over and over again to make it right. But I think from that first day, what we knew, or what we understood to kind of be, I guess, preparing ourselves to do, we were all really committed to it, and we knew that it was important for people to see it and for people to kind of be drawn in because of the technicality of it. But I think once people were able to see what we were trying to do, they appreciated it. I think so.
Yeah. That must have made your stunt work extra hard. Did you have to learn your own stunts? Because I know that scene where he actually gets to beat up some racists, and then goes through the back room, and it's like a one continuous shot through the back room to the front to jumping out the window. Was that a similar kind of experience there, or was there any trickery at all?
Yes, but at the same time, it would not be right of me to take complete credit for all of those stunts. We had a great, first of all, a great stunt team, but then we also had great, individual stunt men who were able to step in whenever there was something that I couldn't do. I know like a lot of actors are like, yeah, I was doing like all my own stunts. Because they would never be able to let me do that if I got hurt. They would, I was gonna say that we had there were some things that I was allowed to do and that I wanted to do, but we definitely had a team to come in and kind of tighten up the rough edges. And there were some for sure.
Yeah. It's so timely that we were talking about this episode now, because there was just an article that came out that was talking, the headline was, Damon Lindelof's Watchmen was ahead of its time by 9 months, because now we find ourselves talking about all the white supremacist systems and white-centeredness that sort of has invaded our culture and practices for a long, long time, and how do we confront that? So I'm curious, have you, watched, re-examined the episode as we've been going through like the Black Lives Matter protest? And it certainly seems like something that just is speaking directly to us right now.
Well, I think it is quite odd how, and I did read that article as well, how we happen to kind of touch base with this subject well before all of these protests started. And yeah, I've rewatched the episode multiple times just because it's just something that I feel like the more you watch, the more things you kind of catch, the more things you kind of learn. And it's just weird that this conversation about kind of like the America's long history of trying to, like, I guess, get rid of blackness and what it means to be black. And if that's our culture or just our presence in general, it's just kind of like a troubling thing when you try to consider all of the amazing things that black people have done, especially for this country, and kind of how you would think that looking at a timeline in our American history, how we would kind of start from one point and end up in a more positive space. But if you're looking outside and if you're watching the news and if you're looking on social media, it's almost like we're going back in time. Every positive step we take forward, we take 8 steps back. So it's kind of a weird thing when you look at that episode, and it's troubling for sure. I mean, that's, for a lack of a better term, troubling to kind of think that maybe we haven't really progressed as much as one would imagine.
Right. I rewatched it again before talking to you, and the thing that struck me that I don't know if it hit me the same way before was the moment, like, because his wife keeps asking him, are you angry? And you're like, I'm not that angry. And then after he is hanged, comes close to death and is hanged by these racists, he comes home and just finally says, okay, I'm angry. But it's so kind of exhausted, and it's almost like he doesn't have the space to be as angry as he should be, as he is entitled to be. What was that moment like for you?
Well, I think it's just understanding that with most people, or maybe not most, but a lot of people, anger comes from pain. And I think that moment was a moment where he felt like, after all he had been through in his life, and even especially that night, that there was no room for him to try to hide that from someone that he trusted. He obviously trusts June. She's been in his life for a really long time. And after a traumatizing experience like that, it's just like, how can anyone really hold on to that type of pain? You know what I mean? So I think that was just a moment of understanding that people, when they are aggressive, it comes from, them feeling like they need to protect themselves from something. And we all know all the things that Will is kind of fighting for and what he's running from. So I think in that moment, it was just kind of like a release. And it was something that, in order for him to try to fix the issue, he needed to admit to having one. Mm-hmm.
There's a really emotional moment for him where you come back home and Will's son is putting on the Hooded Justice makeup and putting on a version of the costume, and Will tries to rip him out of that. And I was just wondering if you can talk about like what that scene was like for you. What does that moment mean of a son, someone you're taking care of, putting on that mantle?
Well, I think for Will, it was just a moment of him witnessing kind of how traumatic experiences can not only affect you, but affect the loved ones around you. I think when Will decided to put on the hood and to put on the costume and try to fight crime. He was trying to prevent the injustices that were happening around him from kind of evolving into his son's life as well. But also in doing that, if we're talking about all the masks that he was putting on and him trying to cover up his true self, that's probably one of the most negative aspects of him becoming Hood of Justice that he never imagined would kind of, I guess, take over his household. So I think in him coming home and feeling like he's beaten the Klan members and he's burned down the warehouse, and he's able to come home and tell June about this mesmerism and all the different things that, you know, he kind of imagined, you know, were affecting the people around him. He goes home and he sees like his son, like the one thing that he's created in this life that he wanted to fight for is possibly taking on the same emotional and personal burdens that he's carried with him for many years.
Yeah. And, you know, before I let you go, I wanted to bring it back to another point in your career quickly, because this episode has a certain theatricality to it in those long takes and the stylization. Right. And I was reminded that I first kind of was aware of you during Fences, the movie adaptation of Fences, which is based on a play. And I'm wondering if you took anything from that experience of working with Denzel Washington and Viola Davis, and how that has projected you going forward.
Well, I imagine that I will take that experience with every single job that I do moving forward. I don't think that it's something that, you know, I would only draw upon once in a while. I think that was my first film work, and it was obviously with an incredibly talented cast. I was like the luckiest person on the planet to be able to be in that film. I think the biggest thing that I learned from them is to take my time and to enjoy the journey. So when it comes to taking on any job in the future, and even the ones that I did following Fences, the lessons that I learned from Denzel, Viola, Stephen, Russell, Uncle T, Michael T, and everyone that was involved in that project, I've always kept near and dear to my heart for sure.
It's a great job, and congratulations on Watchmen. It's a fantastic episode and a fantastic series. So we can't wait to see what you do next. And everyone who's out there watching, please subscribe to Gold Derby. Make sure you keep up to date with all of our updates during Emmy season. And Jovan, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.